Hi, I'm certified personal property appraiser Dave Maloney, author of Appraising Personal Property Principles and Methodology. This video is another in a series of hot tips for the personal property appraiser. To see all my videos, visit my YouTube channel at youtube.com/asktheappraiser. Note that throughout these tips, I make reference to USPAP. USPAP is an acronym for the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice, which are promulgated by the Appraisal Foundation of Washington, D.C. The goal of USPAP, which is updated biennially, is to maintain public trust in the appraisal profession. For more information about USPAP, visit appraisalfoundation.org. In the very first step of the appraisal process, the appraiser must identify the appraisal problem. Doing so will allow the appraiser to, in turn, determine the scope of work required to produce credible assignment results. The all-important problem identification, step 1, requires the appraiser to identify several elements of information, without which the appraiser simply cannot proceed. The appraiser must identify the client and other intended users. All intended users, not just the client, have needs which must be taken into consideration by the appraiser when determining the scope of work that will be required. The appraiser must identify the intended use of the appraiser's opinions and conclusions. Intended use is how the client will make use of the report: for donation purposes, for acquiring insurance coverage, for liquidating the property. Intended use will help direct the appraiser to his or her choice of the type and definition of value to be used, which, in turn, will direct the appraiser to his or her choice of the most appropriate market to research for data on which to base an opinion of value. For example, if the intended use is for charitable contribution, the appraiser will know to make use of the IRS-mandated value type of fair market value. And by definition, fair market value requires the use of the market in which such properties most commonly sell at retail. The appraiser must decide which market is the most common and then must conduct research from within that most common market. Is the most common market a local or regional auction, a retail gallery, an international auction house, or is the most common market a yard sale, as might be the case for common household goods? The appraiser must also identify the type and definition of value to be used, and cite the source of that definition. If exposure time is a component of the value definition, then the appraiser must develop an opinion of exposure time. For instance, if the client states that the intended use of the report is to price items which must be sold within a short period of time, then exposure time is definitely a component of the value definition the appraiser will be using. The appraiser will be using a forced liquidation value, and as part of value definition, the appraiser must consider the time frame over which the objects will be available for sale: 3 days, 30 days, 2 days. The appraiser must also identify the effective date of the appraiser's opinions and conclusions. Is it the date of donation for a charitable contribution, the date of separation for a divorce appraisal, or the date the damage was noticed for a transit-related damage claim? The appraiser must also identify the item and its value-relevant property characteristics. This is most often done by means of a personal inspection, but the identity of the subject property, as well as its value-relevant property characteristics, could also be obtained by the appraiser by some other means, such as information provided by the client, or by means of an inspection conducted by a fellow appraiser. Included in identifying the property is identifying the ownership interest being appraised, which is often 100%, as well as identifying any encumbrances on the property, such as liens, restrictions, etc. The final element of information that must be identified by the appraiser as part of step 1 is to identify any applicable assignment conditions that will be encountered, such as limiting conditions, extraordinary assumptions, hypothetical conditions, and jurisdictional exceptions. All this information is obtained by the appraiser either from the client, from other sources believed to be reliable, and through personal observations of the property. Many appraisers fail to recognize the importance of problem identification. As a result, they at times become misinformed about a critical bit of information. For example, when retained to develop an opinion of value for an appraisal assignment having litigation as its intended use, what type and definition of value must be developed? In such an assignment, communication with the client's attorney is of critical importance. Is the measure of damages replacement value, fair market value, actual cash value? What is the citation for the definition of the value type required by the attorney? Is there precedent-setting case law that should be cited for the value type and definition being used? Having properly identified the appraisal problem, the appraiser can determine the scope of work that will be necessary to produce credible assignment results. For several hundred pages crammed with hot tips for the personal property appraiser, get a copy of my book, Appraising Personal Property, Principles and Methodology, at appraisalcourseassociates.com.